Me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
I did a lot of my growing up in Orange County, and up until I was about maybe 5 or 6 years old or so, I was living in an apartment complex in Santa Ana on Highland Street. And in that apartment, I lived with my cousin who was around my age, my aunt, my parents, and my older sister. A lot of my time there was spent hanging out with my sister and my cousin because a lot of the kids were older than me, and plus we didn't stay there for too long, so whatever. So yeah, anyway, years after we had moved on from that place, I was taking a trip down memory lane with my mom, and the topic of that apartment came up, and sorry, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so yeah, the topic of that apartment came up, and I asked my mom, like, hey, whatever happened to that cousin that we used to live with? Because, ever since we moved out of that apartment, never heard from him again. And, my mom looks at me kind of perplexed, and she sits me down and she goes, okay, I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told anyone else in the family before because I didn't want to scare them. And, I was kind of confused at what she was trying to get at. But basically, she goes on to say that that kid was in that apartment when we moved in, and that kid was a ghost. And what this kid would do is he would run up and down the hallways and look into everyone's rooms. And that's how my mom first noticed this kid. And he would never go into her room. And her guess is probably because she was an adult. But because I was around his age, he would always be in my room, playing with my toys, hanging out with me, talking to me, whatever. So yeah, I don't know. It's been years, and I still think about that kid all the time. But, the funny thing is, I couldn't tell you a single detail about what that kid looked like. Eye, hair, skin color, I don't know. Clothes that he wore, what his voice sounded like, couldn't tell you. And my mom can't tell you either. She doesn't remember. All she remembers is that there was a kid in that house that ran up and down the hallway. And all I knew is that there was a cousin around my age, and we hung out all the time. But yeah, I don't know. Funny story. I got more if you want them.
I bet I got another story for you, but I should probably preface this by saying that this is not my story, okay? This is my mom's story, and it's a story about some crazy shit that she saw when she first came here to the United States from Vietnam in the 80s, okay? So, believe it or not, it's up to you, but at the very least, it's entertaining. Alright, so my mom came to the US in 1984, and she had a total of 8 siblings, but she could only take 2 at the time, my uncle and my aunt, the aunt from the last story. Now, my whole family here are basically refugees because they came over here from Vietnam, and there had just been a war that ended over there. So obviously, when you come over here, you don't really have much as far as belongings go. You don't have a lot of money. So my mom was getting welfare checks from the government every month to cover basic necessities, try to find a place to live, try to find some food to eat, so on and so forth. Now, because they didn't have that much money to work with at the time, my mom would get into arguments with my uncle all the time about him being wasteful. And one of the things that he was wasteful with the most was with laundry. They didn't have money to be washing clothes on the daily, so my mom would tell him all the time, hey, put your pajamas up on the hook that's on the door, don't throw them in the hamper, I'll wash that on the weekly basis. Now, he would always push back and tell my mom, hey, I'm not putting my pajamas in the hamper. I'm putting it on the hook, like on the door, like you told me every single time. It's you that's putting the pajamas in the hamper, and that pissed her off. So they were arguing back and forth, and it went on for weeks. Eventually, they came to the agreement where every time he would leave the house, he would take my mom to his room and show her that the pajamas were hung up on the door. And she said, okay, that's fine, thinking that that would solve the problem. It didn't. Now, on one particular morning, my mom and my uncle got into a really bad argument, and my uncle left pissed off. Didn't say bye to her, didn't show her his pajamas, whatever. So after she cooled off, she decided to tidy up the house, get some things in order. And one of the things that she did was she went into my uncle's room to check that the pajamas were hung up on the door, and they were. So after she was done with all her chores, she sat down in the living room to watch some TV. Now, when you walk into this apartment, right next to the door is the couch that she was sitting on, and right in front of her was the TV. And on the sides of the TV were 2 hallways, one that led to the kitchen and one that led to the bedrooms. So after sitting there and watching TV for a little while, she noticed in the peripheral that somebody was walking back and forth between bedrooms in the hallway. And she thought it was my uncle because he was wearing his pajamas. Now, she saw him leave the apartment earlier because of the argument, but she didn't see him come back. So she was kind of assuming that he either left school early because he wasn't feeling well, or maybe he had a minimum day or something like that. I don't know what y'all call it in other areas, but in Southern California, Back in the day, if you had a half day at school, it was called a minimum day. Anyway, so she calls out to him and she gets no response. And she kind of figured that he was still pretty heated at her and didn't want to talk. So she was going to leave him alone for a little while to cool off before talking to him again. A few minutes later, she sees him cross the hallway again. And when she goes up to his room to check on him, he's not there. But his clothes, his pajamas, were in the hamper. So at this point, she's freaking the fuck out because she was 100% sure that his pajamas were hanging up on that door when she checked on it last. And he's not home, so what the fuck was wearing his clothes around the house? A couple hours go by and my uncle gets home from school. And as soon as he walks through the door, my mom goes through all of the bedrooms and grabs all of the clothes that she got from that church, and she drove it right back to the donation center and dropped it off there. Her working theory is that the clothes she picked up from that church belonged to someone who had passed away and were donated. And so to this day, she will never thrift. She will never buy anything secondhand. She only buys new clothes. If we gift her, we have to make sure that it's always new, nothing antique, nothing pre-owned, nothing, because of this. So yeah, I got a bunch of other stories, but they're pretty small and insignificant and not really enough to make a full post out of it. But yeah, that was a pretty interesting one. Oh, and by the way, that church that she got all the clothes from was La Purísima Church in Orange. So maybe consider this story the next time you go there trying to look for clothes.